Evelyn Carter slammed her last $25 onto the auctioneer's table, with both hands shaking, her jaw set so hard her teeth ached, and looked that man dead in the eye, while the entire auction yard erupted around her in a roar of laughter that she would hear in her sleep for the rest of her life. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She stood there in her worn dress and her cracked leather boots, and she let them laugh because that horse standing behind the fence, that thin, trembling, scarred little mare that every rancher in Wyoming territory had already written off as a carcass waiting to happen, that horse had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. And something passed between them in that moment that Evelyn had no words for, and no need to explain to anyone who hadn't felt it themselves. "Sold," the auctioneer said, shaking his head like he was doing her a favor by taking her money. Before we go any further into this story, if this is your first time here, please take a moment right now and hit that subscribe button and tap the bell so you never miss a story like this one. And I want you to drop a comment down below telling me what city and state you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel, and I read every single one. Now let's get back to Evelyn, because what happened next is something nobody in that town saw coming. The summer of 1884 had been brutal to Fremont County, Wyoming. 3 seasons of poor grass, 2 years of cattle prices so low that grown men had cried at their kitchen tables after supper when they thought their wives couldn't hear. The kind of summer that makes a person understand in a way they never wanted to exactly how thin the line is between having something and having nothing at all. Evelyn had crossed that line when her husband Thomas died. He had not been a wealthy man. Nobody in Fremont County confused Thomas Carter with a man of means, but he had been steady and stubborn in the good way, and he had loved that little piece of land they called their own with something close to reverence. 20 acres of grass and rocky soil on the eastern edge of the county, a modest stable, a vegetable garden that Evelyn had expanded every spring, and a reputation for honest dealing that Thomas had spent 15 years building one handshake at a time. Then he was gone. A fever, the doctor said. It moved fast the way fevers do when they mean business, and within 9 days, Thomas Carter had gone from a man complaining about a sore throat to a man in the ground behind the church, and Evelyn had stood at that grave in October, rain holding her own elbows, because there was nobody left to hold her. She was 27 years old. She owed the bank $240. She had a ranch that needed 2 people to run, and she was one. The women of Fremont County brought casseroles for the first 2 weeks. The men tipped their hats when they saw her in town, and said things like, "You let us know if you need anything, ma'am," in the tone that meant they hoped very much that she would not. And then life moved on. The way life does, indifferent to individual grief, and Evelyn Carter was left alone to figure out what came next. What came next for 2 years was work. She was not good at being pitied, and she was not interested in being rescued. She hired a boy named Cody Marsh for seasonal work, when she could scrape together his wages, and she learned to do everything else herself. She mended fences in the dark because that was the only time she could spare. She drove her small wagon to market alone and negotiated prices with men who assumed she didn't know what things were worth, and she proved them wrong often enough that some of them started treating her with something approaching respect. But the drought had worn her thin. The grass that should have fed the cattle she was trying to rebuild wasn't coming in right. She had sold off stock at the wrong time under pressure from the bank, and the prices had been terrible. By the morning of the county horse auction in June of 1884, she had $25 to her name, a list of debts that made her stomach tighten every time she thought about it, and a stable that stood empty and silent in a way that felt like grief in its own right. She had not planned to go to the auction. She had driven to town for flour and some wire for fencing, and she had stopped because the crowd was thick, and because something she would never be able to explain it properly, something told her to stop. The auction was already 3/4 done when she arrived. The good horses had gone. There were men here with serious money and serious intentions, men like Nathaniel Blackwood, who owned the largest operation in the county, and who dressed like a man who had never once in his life worried about where next month's money was coming from. Blackwood held court near the front of the crowd the way he always did, surrounded by men who laughed at what he laughed at, and went quiet when he went quiet. Evelyn had stayed near the back. She had watched a few horses change hands for prices that made her feel the distance between herself and real ranching prosperity like a physical weight. She had told herself she was only watching. She was curious. She would leave soon. Then they brought out the mare. She came through the gate sideways, nervous and stumbling, and Evelyn heard the crowd's reaction before she could see clearly what they were reacting to. Laughter, and the specific contemptuous kind, not surprised laughter, but laughter of confirmation, as if this was exactly what everyone expected. The horse was small. She was a dusty brownish-gray color that managed to look neither distinctive nor attractive. The kind of color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her ribs were too visible. She moved with a hitch in her right foreleg that she was trying to hide, working to compensate for it with every step. And Evelyn recognized that effort immediately. It was the way a creature behaves when it is trying very hard not to appear as vulnerable as it is. "Last lot of the day, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out. "This here mare was acquired from a private sale up near Casper. She's had some health trouble, what they're calling a respiratory ailment, but she's through the worst of it. We'll start the bidding at $25. Silence. Not the anticipatory silence of people deciding what to offer. The flat silence of collective disinterest. $25 for a registered mare. The auctioneer tried again with less confidence now. "Registered as what?" someone shouted, and the crowd laughed. "She ain't worth the hay it'd take to feed her through winter," called another voice. $25 to put her out of her misery, maybe, said a man standing just to Evelyn's left, loudly enough that people around him turned to appreciate the joke. The mare stood in the center of the ring, with her head slightly lowered and her ears flicking nervously at the noise. She was breathing harder than she should have been at rest, and then she turned. She turned her head, and she looked directly at Evelyn. Evelyn would spend years trying to describe that moment and never quite getting it right. She was not a woman who put stock in mysticism or signs from above. She was practical in the way that poverty insists upon. But she had looked into enough animal eyes over enough years to know the difference between a creature that was broken and a creature that was enduring. And what she saw in that mare's eyes was not defeat. It was something closer to patience. It was the look of something that had decided to wait out the storm. She started moving before she consciously made the decision. She was through the crowd and at the fence before she could talk herself out of it. And then she was pulling the $25 out of the inside pocket of her coat. And then she was putting it on the table, and the auctioneer was looking at her with genuine uncertainty. "Ma'am?" $25, Evelyn said. "I'm buying her." The auctioneer looked at her money. He looked at the mare. He looked back at Evelyn. "Ma'am, I want to make sure you understand what you're looking at here. This horse has been ill. There's no guarantee she'll—" "I understand what I'm looking at," Evelyn said. "Are you going to take my money or not?" The laughter started before he even said the word sold. It rolled through the crowd in waves, the kind of communal mockery that bonds people together over someone else's expense. She heard it clearly and distinctly, the laughing and comments thrown in her direction that she did not dignify with acknowledgement. She heard Nathaniel Blackwood's voice closer than she expected. $25? He said with a satisfaction that had something unpleasant underneath it. "That's the price of sentiment, I suppose. No rancher in this county would call that a business decision." He wasn't speaking to her, she realized. He was speaking to the men around him, performing for an audience as he always did. "No, sir," agreed one of his companions. "That's the price of a widow who don't know any better." Evelyn kept her eyes forward. She did not look at Nathaniel Blackwood. She had nothing to say to a man like that in a moment like this. She picked up the rope halter and walked into the ring. The mare watched her come. She stood very still while Evelyn approached. Which surprised her. The horse had been nervous and skittish a moment ago, reacting to the crowd and the noise. But something about Evelyn's approach changed the animal's whole posture. Her ears went forward. Her breathing slowed slightly. Evelyn reached out and put her hand very gently on the side of the mare's neck. "All right," she said softly, so only the horse could hear. "I've got you now. We're going to walk out of here together, and we're not going to let them see us hurry." The horse took one step toward her. Just one. But it was deliberate, and Evelyn led her out through the gate while the laughter continued, and she kept her spine straight and her pace even, and she did not look back once. The walk home was 6 miles. Evelyn did not attempt to ride the mare. She could see the exhaustion in her, the careful way she managed that weak leg, and there was no reason to add weight to what was already a hard day for an animal that had been through enough. So they walked together, Evelyn leading and the horse following, and the afternoon shifted into early evening, with the sky going orange and then pink, and then the purple-gray of approaching dark. Evelyn talked to her the whole way. She wasn't sure why exactly, except that the quiet needed to be filled, and the mare seemed to listen, her ears moving to follow the sound of Evelyn's voice. "I don't know what your name was before," Evelyn told her, "and I expect it doesn't matter much now. I'm going to call you Dusty, on account of that color you are. It's not the most glamorous name in the world, I realize, but I think you'll find it suits you just fine." The mare's ear flicked back at the word Dusty, as though she were considering it. "I also want to be honest with you," Evelyn continued, "because honesty seemed important. Because I think you've probably had enough people being dishonest about your prospects. I don't know if you're going to recover. I don't know what exactly is wrong with your leg, or how bad that sickness really was. What I do know is that you're going to have good food, clean water, and someone who will sit with you if you're having a hard night. That's what I can promise you. It isn't much, but I keep my promises." She thought about Thomas then briefly, and with the particular ache that grief settles into after 2 years, no longer sharp enough to stop her breathing, just always present like a stone in her shoe that she'd learned to walk with. Thomas had believed in her judgment. When the whole world was telling her she was wrong about something, Thomas had this way of looking at her patient, certain a little amused that communicated without words, that he thought the whole world was probably mistaken and would likely figure it out eventually. She wished he could see her right now. She thought he probably would have liked Dusty. By the time they reached the ranch, the stars were beginning to show themselves, and Evelyn led Dusty into the stable and settled her into the stall that had been empty for the better part of a year. She brought clean water. She brought hay, the good portion she'd been saving. She sat on a stool outside the stall with the lantern hanging from the nail above her head, and watched the mare drink and then eat with the careful deliberateness of an animal that has learned not to trust that the food will still be there tomorrow. "You've been hungry a while," Evelyn observed. Dusty didn't look up from the hay. "That's all right," Evelyn said. "We've both been hungry a while." The next morning, Cody Marsh arrived at first light and stopped dead in the doorway of the stable. He was 19 years old, lean as a fence post, with a serious face that he'd cultivated to compensate for the fact that he was not yet old enough for anyone to take seriously without effort. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, looking at Dusty. "Is that a new horse?" "It is." "She looks—" He searched for a diplomatic word and failed to locate one. "She looks like she's seen some hard times." "She has," Evelyn agreed. "If you don't mind my asking, ma'am, where'd she come from?" "County auction yesterday." Cody studied Dusty for a long moment. The mare was eating slowly and steadily, ignoring him, with the mild disregard of an animal that had decided he was not a threat. "What did you pay for her?" he asked, with the directness that the very young occasionally deploy before they've learned better. $25. Cody's expression went through several changes in quick succession, ending somewhere in the vicinity of carefully controlled concern. "I see," he said. "You're doing the same math everyone else did yesterday," Evelyn told him. "I'm not." "I wouldn't, ma'am, I just—" $25 for an animal I can nurse back to health is a better investment than $25 in the bank at the rate I'm getting, Evelyn said. "That's the math I did." Cody looked at Dusty for another moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said in the tone of a person who is not fully persuaded but has decided not to press the issue. "I need you to clean that back stall properly today," Evelyn told him, handing him a list she'd written out that morning. "And check the north fence again. I thought I saw it pulling loose near the post by the creek." "Yes, ma'am." He got to work, and Evelyn went back to Dusty. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. The mare's appetite was inconsistent in the way that animals recovering from serious illness tend to be good one day, almost nothing the next, as though the body hadn't fully committed to the project of getting better yet. She drank well, which Evelyn took as an encouraging sign. She slept long hours and woke easily startled by sounds she should not have been startled by, which told Evelyn that she had been in a state of constant low-level fear for some time before this, and her nervous system had not yet learned that things had changed. Evelyn understood that particular condition well enough. She changed the mare's routine gradually. She was patient in the mornings, letting Dusty set the pace. She would stand at the fence with her coffee and simply be present, not asking anything, just existing nearby, letting the horse learn that Evelyn's presence meant safety and not demand. On the 14th day, Dusty walked over to the fence on her own. She put her head over the rail and pushed her nose against Evelyn's shoulder gently, the way a horse does when it has decided you're trustworthy. Evelyn stood very still. "Well," she said quietly, "hello to you too." It was around this time that the talk started. Fremont County was small enough that everybody's business belonged in some sense to everybody, and Evelyn had long since accepted this as one of the facts of rural life. She heard it at the dry goods store. She heard it at the post office. She heard it in the particular silence that fell when she entered a room and the particular murmur that followed when she left. She spent her last money on that horse, every last dollar. Poor thing. Grief does strange things to a person. Nathaniel Blackwood says she'll have to sell the land by fall, says the bank won't wait forever. Someone ought to say something to her, help her understand she's made a mistake. Mrs. Florence Webb, who ran the town's only millinery shop, and who had appointed herself the unofficial minister to widows throughout the county, came to see Evelyn on a Wednesday morning with a plate of biscuits and an expression of compassionate concern that Evelyn recognized immediately as the prelude to unwanted advice. "You know we all just want what's best for you." Florence began settling herself at the kitchen table with the ease of a woman who has never quite been persuaded she's unwelcome. "I appreciate that," Evelyn said, pouring coffee. "It's just that people are worried. That horse you bought, her name is Dusty." Florence paused. "Yes, Dusty. People are concerned that you may have made a decision that you'll find—" "Florence," Evelyn said pleasantly, setting a cup of coffee in front of her guest. "Have a biscuit. I just think—" She drank a full bucket of water this morning and finished her hay. Her leg is better. She walked the length of the fence without the hitch in her step. Evelyn sat down across from her. "So I'm not worried, but I appreciate you coming." Florence opened her mouth and closed it again. "These are good biscuits," Evelyn said. Florence left 40 minutes later, no wiser and no more persuaded than she had arrived. But Evelyn had managed to redirect the conversation 4 times without being impolite about it, which she counted as a reasonable success. It was 3 weeks after that when the first truly strange thing happened. Evelyn had been working Dusty lightly on a long line, nothing strenuous, just getting the mare used to being directed and handled. The leg had improved dramatically, almost completely in fact, which still surprised her every time she watched the horse move, because the improvement was faster and more thorough than she had any right to expect. What surprised her more was the way Dusty moved. She had the kind of stride that you notice. Not spectacular in any single element, not the longest stride or the highest knee action or the most dramatic pace. But there was something in the overall quality of how she moved, a completeness to it, a precision, and an economy that made Evelyn stop the line work and just watch. She stood there with the rope in her hands, and she watched Dusty circle the paddock, and she thought this horse was trained. Not by accident, not just by handling. She had been trained by someone who knew what they were doing, by someone who had wanted something specific out of her, and the training was still there underneath everything that had happened to her since. "Where did you come from?" Evelyn said aloud. Dusty trotted past her ears forward, moving like she had a purpose. It was the kind of question that deserved an answer. Evelyn started asking around carefully, and without advertising what she was looking for. She wrote a letter to the auction house in Casper that had sent Dusty down to the county sale. She talked to a man at the feed store who knew horses the way some people know scripture thoroughly and with devotion. She got a partial answer 3 weeks later when she drove out to see Samuel Dawson. Samuel was 71 years old and had spent 4 decades working with horses across 3 territories. He had retired to a small property 8 miles outside of town, where he kept 2 old mares and a library of breeding records that he maintained with the precision of a man who believes the past matters and can prove it. Evelyn had met him twice before, once at a county fair, once at the same church Thomas had attended, and she had the impression of a man who said nothing carelessly. She brought him to the fence where Dusty was standing and watched his face while he looked at her. She saw him notice. It wasn't dramatic. His expression didn't change dramatically, but she watched his eyes go quiet in a particular way, the way a person's eyes go quiet when they are looking at something that requires serious attention. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you had her?" "About 6 weeks. "And she looked worse when you got her?" "Considerably." Samuel nodded slowly. He walked along the fence to a different angle, never taking his eyes off Dusty. The mare watched him back, which itself was interesting. She'd been skittish with strangers, but she was still watching Samuel with something more like curiosity than alarm. "Where'd you get her?" he asked. "County auction. She came down from Casper. From a private sale," the auctioneer said. "Before that, I don't know." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly. "How much did you pay?" $25. He looked at her then. A long look. $25, he repeated. "Yes, sir." He turned back to Dusty. He was quiet for such a long time that Evelyn began to wonder whether he was going to say anything else at all. "Mrs. Carter," he said finally, "do you know anything about the Silver Creek line?" "I know the name. Champion Bloodline, wasn't it? I heard Thomas mention it once or twice." "Champion doesn't begin to cover it," Samuel said. "Silver Creek horses were the closest thing to legendary that I've seen in 40 years of doing this. The line started with a stallion named Creek's Honor, back in the 1850s, endurance intelligence, and a quality of movement that people paid enormous money to breed into their herds. A good Silver Creek horse was worth more than most men made in a year." He paused. The line was believed to have been destroyed. Disease came through a breeding operation up in Casper in the late 1870s. Killed most of the stock. The rancher who owned them was Harlan Voss, and when the disease hit, he sold off everything he could at whatever price he could get, and after that, nobody knew where the remaining animals ended up. He looked at Dusty again. See the shoulder on her, the depth of chest, the way she distributes weight, the conformation markings on her forelegs. He was speaking almost to himself now. "I've been looking at horses for 40 years, and I can count on one hand the times I've seen that combination." He turned to face Evelyn fully. "I'm not prepared to tell you this is certain," he said with the careful precision of a man who respects the weight of what he is saying. "I would need to see the records, and they may not exist anymore. But if you asked me right now at this fence what I believe I am looking at, I believe I am looking at a Silver Creek mare." Evelyn looked at Dusty. Dusty had moved to the water trough and was drinking unbothered. $25. Evelyn said softly, more to herself than to Samuel. "People often mistake something rare for something worthless," Samuel said, "when they haven't taken the time to understand what they are seeing." He paused. "There's something else you need to know." "Tell me." Samuel looked uncomfortable for the first time. "The breeding operation in Casper, the one that sold off the Silver Creek stock during the disease outbreak, wasn't Voss's original operation. He'd sold it before the disease hit. The man who bought it was Nathaniel Blackwood." Evelyn went very still. "Blackwood bought the Silver Creek operation," Samuel said. "He didn't advertise it. I don't think he fully understood what he had, and he was embarrassed later when the disease hit, and he had to sell off the stock. He wanted it quiet. He sold the horses through intermediaries, through small auctions at cheap prices, so the connection to his name wouldn't be obvious." Evelyn's eyes were on Dusty. "So she was his?" she said. "I believe so." "He sold her. for what it sounds like was not very much money to an intermediary who eventually consigned her to the Casper sale, which sent her to your county auction. Samuel's voice was even. The richest man in Fremont County accidentally sold away what may be one of the last Silver Creek mares in existence. A sound was building in Evelyn's chest that she was working very hard to keep from escaping. And bought her back for $25, she said. Except not him. Me. You. Samuel confirmed. Evelyn let out a long, slow breath. She looked at Dusty, who had finished drinking and was now standing with her face turned into a thin breeze, looking if anything entirely unbothered by the revelation that she was apparently worth a great deal more than anyone had admitted at the county auction. "Does Blackwood know?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know what Blackwood knows," Samuel said carefully. "I know that he doesn't know I've been to see you today. But if he finds out, he will find out eventually," Samuel said. "This is a small county, Mrs. Carter. These things come out." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to understand what that will mean. Blackwood is not a man who takes being wrong gracefully. And discovering that the animal he dismissed that he sold away without understanding its value ended up in the possession of the widow he publicly mocked at auction for the exact price he failed to recognize." He let the sentence finish itself. Evelyn understood. "He'll want her back," she said. "He will want her back," Samuel agreed. "And men like Blackwood have a great many tools available to them when they want something." Evelyn looked at the mare for a long time. She thought about the auction yard and the laughter. She thought about the $25 on the table and the auctioneer's doubtful face and the specific sound of Nathaniel Blackwood's voice carrying across the yard the price of sentiment. She thought about Dusty looking at her through the fence, patient and waiting with that particular quality of something that has survived and intends to continue surviving. "Mr. Dawson," she said. "Ma'am." "Are you going to help me find those records?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, something that on a younger man's face might have looked like anticipation. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I believe that's exactly what I'm going to do." Samuel Dawson did not waste time. He was back at Evelyn's ranch the very next morning with a leather satchel under his arm and the focused expression of a man who had spent the night thinking hard and sleeping little. He set the satchel on the kitchen table without being invited to unbuckled it and spread out 3 documents that he handled with the careful deliberateness of someone who understands that paper is fragile and what's written on it may not be. Evelyn poured coffee and sat across from him and waited. "These are copies," Samuel said, smoothing the edges of the first document with his thumb. "I keep copies of everything. The originals are in a strongbox that I haven't opened in 6 years, but I knew where to look." He turned one of the pages toward her. "This is a breeding record from 1871. Creek's Honor bloodline. Documented foals, confirmed lineage. You see these markings here, the confirmation notations on the left margin." Evelyn leaned in. The handwriting was old and careful, the ink brown with age, and the columns of information were dense and precise in the way that serious records always are. "Compare that to this," Samuel said, sliding a second document alongside the first. "This is my own notation from yesterday written after I got home. The shoulder measurement estimation, the chest depth, the foreleg confirmation." Evelyn looked from one document to the other. Even without the expertise to read every detail, she could see it. The numbers matched. Not approximately. Not close enough to be interesting. They matched in the specific particular way that facts match when they are describing the same thing. "Samuel," she said. "I know," he said. "This is real." "I believe it is." They sat with that for a moment, the weight of it settling between them like something physical. "What do we do now?" Evelyn asked. "First, we verify it properly," Samuel said. "There's a man in Cheyenne, a breeder named Arthur Holt, who has the most complete Silver Creek documentation outside of what the Voss family kept. If anyone can confirm this without question, it's Holt. I've written to him before. He'll respond." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Evelyn pressed her lips together. "And in those 2 or 3 weeks," Samuel looked at her over his coffee cup. "In those 2 or 3 weeks, you say nothing to anyone. You go about your business. You keep working Dusty the way you've been working her, which by the look of her was exactly right, and you do not give Nathaniel Blackwood any reason to look in your direction." "He's already looking," Evelyn said. "He was at the Mercantile on Tuesday. He made a point of walking past me twice. Said nothing both times, just looked." Samuel set down his cup. "He doesn't know yet. If he knew, he would not be subtle about it. That's not his nature. What he's doing right now is watching. He knows something is different, and he can't place what it is." "Why would he think anything is different? I bought a $25 horse. That's not new information." "No," Samuel said. "But you're not behaving the way he expected you to." Evelyn frowned. "He expected you to be embarrassed," Samuel said. "He expected you to either sell her quietly or lose her to the bank and let him have the satisfaction of being right. Instead, you're—" He gestured in a way that took in the kitchen, the ranch, the whole shape of her life these past weeks. "You're not embarrassed. You're working. You look like a woman who knows something." "I didn't know anything when I bought her," Evelyn said. "No," Samuel agreed. "But you looked like you did, and that bothers him." That thought stayed with Evelyn after Samuel left. She turned it over while she worked through the rest of the morning, checking the fence Cody had repaired, pulling a loose nail from the stable wall, sitting with Dusty for a while, in the easy quiet that had developed between them over the past weeks. She kept coming back to what Samuel had said, that she looked like a woman who knows something. She hadn't known anything when she put that money on the table. She had known only what she saw in the mare's eyes, which she supposed was a kind of knowing, just not the kind that could be written in a column of figures and verified by a man in Cheyenne. She was thinking about this when Cody came around the corner of the stable at a pace that was faster than his usual measured stride, and she knew before he opened his mouth that whatever he was about to say was not routine. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "Blackwood's foreman is at the gate." Evelyn stood up straight. "What does he want?" "Says he has a message from Mr. Blackwood. Says it's a business matter." She thought of Samuel's words from that morning. "You do not give Nathaniel Blackwood any reason to look in your direction." "Tell him I'll be right out," she said. The foreman's name was Dale Pruitt, and he was the kind of man who wore his employer's importance the way some men wear a borrowed coat, visibly and with great care not to let it slip. He was standing just outside the gate with his hat in his hands, which was a performance of politeness that Evelyn did not find particularly convincing. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "Mr. Blackwood asked me to pass along his regards." "That's kind of him," Evelyn said in a tone that gave nothing away. "He also asked me to let you know that he's been thinking about your situation. He understands these past 2 years have been difficult, and he wants you to know that he's a man who believes in helping his neighbors when he can." Evelyn waited. "He'd like to make you an offer on the mare," Pruitt said. "The one from the auction. He's authorized me to offer you $150, which I think we can both agree is considerably more than what you paid, and considerably more than the animal is likely worth on the open market. $150. 6 times what she'd paid, from a man who had called it sentiment." Evelyn kept her face exactly as it was. "I appreciate Mr. Blackwood's concern," she said, "but the mare isn't for sale." Pruitt's expression flickered. "Mrs. Carter, $150 is—" "I heard the number," she said pleasantly. "And the mare isn't for sale. Please thank Mr. Blackwood for the offer." There was a pause in which Pruitt tried to decide what move came next and came up empty. "He may increase the figure," Pruitt said. "If you had a different number in mind—" "The number doesn't matter," Evelyn said. "She isn't for sale at any figure. Is there anything else?" Pruitt put his hat back on. "No, ma'am," he said with a flatness that told her the conversation was going to be reported back in detail. "I'll pass that along." He left. Evelyn watched him go, and then she went back inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without doing anything at all. $150. The bank payment she owed was $240. She had $37 in the coffee can on the top shelf. If she sold Dusty at Blackwood's price, She would be $147 closer to clearing her debt, and she would be free of the anxiety that woke her at 3 in the morning at least twice a week, and she would have nothing. She would have absolutely nothing. Because the debt would still be there, smaller, but not gone, and the stable would be empty again, and she would have proven every single person in this county right. She would have been the widow who made a foolish decision, and then corrected it for a fraction of what it was worth, and Nathaniel Blackwood would have gotten exactly what he wanted for $150, and the story would be over. She thought about Dusty looking at her through the fence at the auction. She thought about that one deliberate step toward her. She got up and wrote a letter to the bank asking for 60 additional days on her payment, citing livestock recovery and anticipated income from the upcoming county fair's working horse exhibition. It was not a lie exactly. She did intend to exhibit Dusty at the fair. Whether that would translate into income depended on factors she could not yet control. She sent the letters with Cody the next morning and did not let herself think about whether it would work. The answer came back in 4 days. 60 days the bank manager wrote, but not a day more, and he hoped Mrs. Carter understood the seriousness of the institution's position. She understood. She went back to work. The letter from Arthur Holt in Cheyenne arrived on a Thursday 17 days after Samuel had written to him. Samuel brought it himself, driving out to her ranch in the mid-morning with the leather satchel over his shoulder again, and an expression she couldn't read, carefully neutral in a way that made her think he was working to keep it that way. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put the letter in front of her. She read it. Then she read it again slowly, because the first time her eyes had moved through the words faster than her mind was prepared to receive them. Arthur Holt wrote with the compressed precision of a man who respects paper and ink and does not waste either. He confirmed that the breeding notations Samuel had sent him matched the Silver Creek documentation in his possession at 4 distinct confirmation points. He noted that he had believed for some years that at least 2 or 3 Silver Creek mares had survived the disease outbreak and the subsequent sell-off of the Casper operation, but that no confirmed sightings had been recorded. He asked whether the mare in question was available for breeding consultation. He noted in a single direct sentence at the close of the letter that a confirmed Silver Creek mare in good health would be conservatively valued at no less than $2,000 and potentially considerably more if the lineage could be fully documented and her foals proved to carry the line's characteristic qualities. Evelyn set the letter down. $2,000, she said. At minimum, Samuel said. She pressed both hands flat on the table. He offered me $150, she said. Blackwood. 6 weeks ago. I know. He knew, she said. When he sent Pruitt out here with that offer, Samuel, he knew. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Or he suspected. There's a difference, but perhaps not a meaningful one from where you're sitting. He suspected she was worth something significant, and he offered me $150. Yes. And I said no. You said no. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and felt something that was partly triumph and partly fury, and mostly a cold settling clarity, the kind that comes when you understand a situation completely for the first time and realize you've been in the middle of it all along. He's going to come back, she said. He already has, Samuel said. Pruitt was in town yesterday asking questions about you, about your debts, about the bank situation. Evelyn brought her eyes down from the ceiling. He's going to try to use the bank, she said. I think he's going to try several things, Samuel said carefully. He's a man of resources, and he's been embarrassed. That combination tends to produce sustained effort. What kind of sustained effort? Samuel looked at his hands. He already owns 2 notes on properties adjacent to yours. He's a preferred customer at your bank, has been for 20 years. I don't know what he can do exactly. I know what men like him have done before. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, somewhere near the stable, Dusty made a sound, the low carrying noise a horse makes when it's content, and simply announcing its presence to the world. Evelyn listened to it. I need to document everything, she said. The purchase, the recovery, the lineage verification. Every piece of paper in a sequence that cannot be disputed. That's exactly right, Samuel said. and I need a lawyer. There's James Whitfield in Laramie. He handled my brother's property case 3 years ago. He's honest and he's thorough, which around here is worth more than clever. Can you get a message to him? I'll go myself if you need me to. I need you to, Evelyn said. Samuel nodded once with the clean economy of a man who means what he agrees to. There's one more thing, he said, and something in his voice changed in a way that made Evelyn look at him more carefully. Tell me. The Wyoming Championship Horse Trials, Samuel said. In October. You know them. I know of them. I've never had a horse to enter. The championship is one of the most watched events in the territory. Judges come from 3 states. Breeders attend from as far as Denver and Kansas City. Anyone who wins or even places strongly their horse is known. Their name is known. He met her eyes. If Dusty runs in the championship trials and performs the way I think she can perform, the documentation question becomes almost secondary. Because every serious breeder in the territory will have seen her move. Every person who matters in this world will have watched her. And Nathaniel Blackwood will have to explain publicly how that horse ended up going for $25 at a county auction. Evelyn felt something move through her chest, not quite excitement, not quite fear. Something that lived between those two things. October, she said. That's 4 months. 4 months to condition her properly. 4 months to document the lineage fully with Holt's confirmation in writing. 4 months to let the story become something that can't be argued away. And 4 months for Blackwood to do whatever he's going to do, Evelyn said. Yes, Samuel said. That too. She stood up and walked to the window that faced the stable. Dusty was at the fence, head over the rail, watching the road, with her ears up in the alert and interested way she had when something had caught her attention. 4 months ago, that horse had been standing in an auction yard, being laughed at. She looked like something entirely different now. She moved like something entirely different. Every day that passed, Evelyn could see more clearly what Samuel had seen at the fence that first morning. The confirmation, the quality of movement, the particular intelligence in those dark eyes. It was as though recovery had pulled away a covering, the way cleaning a piece of silver reveals what was always underneath the tarnish. I'll do it, Evelyn said. She heard Samuel let out a long breath behind her, and she had the sense he had been slightly less certain of her answer than he was letting on. I'll start on the conditioning program, he said, and I'll write to Whitfield. Good. He stood to leave, gathering the letter and his satchel, and at the door he paused with his hand on the frame. Mrs. Carter, he said, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen good horses, and I've seen great ones, and I've seen what happens when someone who doesn't understand what they're holding tries to sell it off cheap. He looked at her steadily. You walked into that auction yard with $25, and you saw something that a man with 40 years of experience would have been proud to see. I want you to remember that in the months ahead, when things get difficult. When things get difficult, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. Not if. He left. Evelyn stood at the window for a moment longer, watching Dusty at the fence. Then she put on her work gloves and went outside. They started the conditioning work the following week. Samuel arriving 3 mornings out of 7 and bringing with him a program that he had clearly thought through with great care. It was gradual, methodical, designed around Dusty's specific history, the illness, the recovery, the leg that had been weak and was now strong, but still needed to be trusted before it could be pushed. Evelyn learned things about her horse that surprised her even now, months into their relationship. Dusty was smart in a way that went beyond the ordinary horse intelligence of reading a rider's mood or learning a routine. She watched. She assessed. When Samuel introduced a new exercise, she would try it once with what felt like exploratory caution, work out whatever it was asking of her, and then do it better the second time, in a way that suggested she had made a decision about it. She had opinions. She had preferences. She communicated both with a directness that Evelyn found privately extremely admirable. She also had an endurance that became more evident the more she was asked to work. "Watch this," Samuel said one morning 3 weeks into the conditioning program. He extended their usual circuit by half again the usual distance, and Evelyn rode alongside on the old gelding she kept for ranch work, watching Dusty cover the ground. Where most horses would have shown some flagging at that distance, a slight heaviness in the step, a subtle resistance, Dusty simply continued. Same pace, same quality of movement. She was not struggling. She was not performing. She was working at a level of effort that seemed genuinely sustainable. How long could she go? Evelyn asked. That, Samuel said, watching the mare, with an expression Evelyn recognized by now as his version of deep satisfaction, is what's going to make Nathaniel Blackwood lose sleep. And then the trouble started. Not all at once. It never comes all at once when it comes from someone with money and patience and a long memory. It comes the way cold weather comes. You notice it first in small things, and by the time you understand that winter has arrived, it's already around you. It started with the bank. Evelyn had expected the 60 days to hold. She had the letter. She had the manager's signature. She had every reason to believe the agreement was solid. She found out it wasn't solid on a Tuesday morning in August when she went to town for supplies and stopped at the bank to make a partial payment. And the teller, a young man named Harris, who had always been pleasant and professional, looked at her paperwork with an expression that went through several changes before settling on something she could only describe as stricken. "Mrs. Carter," Harris said quietly, leaning slightly forward over the counter. "There have been some changes to your account." "What kind of changes?" "The note has been there's been a transfer of the primary obligation. The bank has sold your mortgage note to a private holder." Evelyn felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet. "Sold it? To whom?" Harris glanced to his left and then back at her. He did not say the name out loud. He wrote it on a small piece of paper and slid it across the counter. She looked at it. "Nathaniel Blackwood." She kept her face still. She kept her voice even. "When did this happen?" she asked. "Last week, ma'am." "I'm sorry. I thought you would have been notified. I wasn't." "I'm sorry," Harris said again, and she believed that he was, and it didn't help anything. She folded the paper and put it in her coat pocket, and thanked him and walked out of the bank and stood in the street for a moment, with the sun on her face, and thought very carefully about what she was going to do next. Blackwood now held her mortgage. He could call it due at his discretion, subject to the terms of the original note, which gave him 60 days' notice. 60 days to pay $240 or lose the ranch. She had $37. She walked to the telegraph office and sent a message to James Whitfield in Laramie. Then she walked to Samuel's property. He met her at the door with the expression of a man who has already heard the news, which told her the town was as small as she had always known it was. "I know," he said. "He bought my mortgage. I heard this morning." "Samuel, he can take the ranch." "He can try," Samuel said, which was not quite the same thing, and he said it with a specificity that made her stop. "Tell me," she said. He let her in. He had been at his records. She could see documents spread on the table, the same leather satchel, his reading glasses on top of a letter she didn't recognize. "Sit down," he said. "I need to show you something." She sat. "When Blackwood operated the Silver Creek breeding line in Casper," Samuel said, pulling a document from the pile. "He did so under a secondary business interest, not under his own name directly. He used a partnership arrangement with a man named Victor Cale. The horses were registered under the Cale-Blackwood Breeding Partnership. Are you following me?" Yes. When the disease hit and Blackwood sold off the stock, he did so through Cale. The sales were conducted in Cale's name. The records, if they show anything, show Cale as the seller. So Blackwood's name isn't on the sale that produced Dusty. Not directly, no. Which means that if Dusty's Silver Creek lineage is confirmed, Blackwood cannot easily claim he has a prior ownership interest. He sold her. Under his partner's name, yes, but he sold her. Legally, she is yours. Samuel's voice was careful and precise. What he can do, what he is trying to do, is use your debt to force you to sell to him. He doesn't need legal ownership of the horse if he owns the ranch. If he forecloses, he gets everything on the property. Evelyn sat very still. What's to stop him? Time, Samuel said. And the championship trials. And James Whitfield. He paused. And the fact that what he did using a partnership to obscure his identity in those Casper sales, which were conducted while he publicly maintained a reputation as a breeder of the highest standard, may not be illegal exactly. But it is the kind of thing that once known changes how people see a man. You're saying the story is the protection, Evelyn said slowly. I'm saying the story, once it's fully told, becomes very difficult to bury, especially if it's told in front of every serious breeder and horse judge in 3 states. The championship trials, she said. He cannot quietly foreclose on a woman whose horse just ran in the championship trials. He cannot quietly buy a mortgage from a bank and call it due 60 days later without people asking why. Not if everyone is already watching. Evelyn looked at the documents on the table. She thought about the 60 days. The championship trials were in October. She had enough time barely, but she had it. He's going to try to stop her from running, she said. That is my expectation, yes. What can he do? I don't know yet, Samuel said honestly. But I've known Nathaniel Blackwood for 30 years, and I know that he will try something. He is not a man who accepts the public version of a story he cannot control. She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about Thomas, the way she often did when things got hard. Not with grief exactly anymore, but with something like consultation, as though she were checking in. She thought he would have said, "Then don't let him control it." "I need Whitfield here," she said. "Not in Laramie, here. I'll send another telegram today. And I need to know Samuel. I need you to tell me honestly, is Dusty ready? Can she actually compete at the championship trials level?" Samuel didn't answer immediately, which was how she knew she was about to get the truth and not reassurance. He thought about it the way he thought about everything carefully, with respect for the question's weight. "She's ready to compete," he said. "Whether she can win depends on things we won't know until she runs. She has never raced competitively. She has never been in a field with other horses under those conditions. There are variables." He looked at her. "What I can tell you is that I have never in 40 years seen a horse with her quality of endurance. And the championship trials have an endurance component in the final stage that has broken horses that looked unbeatable in the speed tests. She doesn't break," Evelyn said. "No," Samuel agreed. "She doesn't." Evelyn stood up. "Then we keep working," she said. And for a moment, before she put her coat back on and started the drive home, Samuel Dawson looked at her the way Thomas used to, with that patient, certain, slightly amused expression that said he thought the world was probably wrong and would figure it out eventually. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I believe we do." James Whitfield arrived on a Friday. He was not what Evelyn had pictured from Samuel's description. She had imagined someone older, more worn down by the specific kind of work that involves standing between people with less money and people with more of it. Instead, the man who climbed down from the stage in front of the Fremont County Post Office was perhaps 40, compact and direct in his movements, with a face that had the quality of someone who had learned early that expressions cost you something and had decided to spend carefully. He shook her hand like she was a colleague and not a client, which she noted. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "Samuel speaks well of you." "Samuel is generous," she said. "Samuel is precise," Whitfield corrected, picking up his bag. "He doesn't exaggerate in either direction. If he says well, he means well." He looked at her steadily. "He also told me about the mortgage. I want to hear everything from the beginning, and I want to hear it before I see the horse." They sat in her kitchen for 2 hours. Whitfield did not take many notes, which initially concerned her, and then she understood he was listening in a way that meant he was holding the information, not just recording it. He asked precise questions at precise moments, questions that told her he was building something in his head, assembling a structure out of what she gave him, testing each piece as it went in. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "The mortgage transfer is legal," he said. "I want you to know that first, so we're not building on a false hope. Blackwood did nothing procedurally wrong in purchasing your note." "I know," Evelyn said. "What he did wrong," Whitfield continued, is considerably more interesting. The sale of the Silver Creek stock through the Cale Blackwood Partnership, conducted under Cale's name, to obscure Blackwood's involvement that was not disclosed to the buyers. Which means that anyone who purchased one of those horses believing they were buying from an independent seller was buying under a misrepresentation. He paused. Including the auction house in Casper, including the county auctioneer who listed her as a horse of unknown quality acquired through private sale. Evelyn felt something sharpen in her chest. He misrepresented the horse's lineage, she said. He allowed the horse's lineage to be misrepresented, which is a distinction that matters less than one might hope in court, but still matters. Whitfield set his hands flat on the table. Here is what I think we can do, and here is what I think we cannot do. He talked for another 30 minutes. When he was done, Evelyn had a clearer picture of her situation than she'd had since the morning Harris slid that piece of paper across the bank counter. It was not entirely comfortable, this clearer picture, but she had learned a long time ago that comfortable ignorance was still ignorance, and what she was dealing with was not the kind of situation that ignorance survived. The core of it was this: Whitfield could challenge the foreclosure on procedural grounds, could argue misrepresentation in the original chain of sale, could potentially establish that Blackwood's acquisition of the mortgage represented a conflict of interest given his prior undisclosed ownership of the horse. None of these arguments would win quickly. None of them were certain. What they could do was buy time. And time, Whitfield agreed, was the primary resource. The championship trials, he said when she explained what Samuel had proposed. October, she said. 8 weeks. He thought about it with the same careful expression he applied to everything. Keep the horse sound, he said. Keep the documentation moving forward. And Mrs. Carter. He looked at her with a directness that she found she appreciated. Do not make any agreements with Blackwood. Not verbal, not written, not through intermediaries. If he sends Pruitt, you send Pruitt away. If he comes himself, you say nothing that can be characterized as negotiation. Anything you say becomes his evidence. He came himself last week, Evelyn said. Whitfield went still. You didn't tell me that. I'm telling you now. What did he say? Evelyn had not mentioned it to Samuel either, because it had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, and she was still finding the words for it. Blackwood had arrived without Pruitt alone on a Tuesday evening when the light was going low, and Cody had already left for the day. He had tied his horse at the gate and walked up to the fence where she was working Dusty on the long line, and he had stood there watching for a moment before he spoke. She looks different, he'd said. Evelyn had kept working the line. I'm not here to argue with you, Blackwood had said. I want you to understand something. I respect what you've done with her. I mean that. You saw something I didn't see, and He'd paused in a way that suggested the next word cost him something. I'm willing to acknowledge that. That's generous of you, Evelyn had said, keeping her eyes on Dusty. I want to offer you a genuine arrangement, not a sale, a partnership. You maintain the horse, I provide the capital to clear your debt and expand the operation. We split the breeding revenue, 50-50. She had finally looked at him then. He was standing with his hat in his hands, which was the same performance Dale Pruitt had given her weeks earlier, and she understood that the hat was a prop in an act of reasonableness that she was supposed to find persuasive. And who holds the paperwork on the arrangement? She'd asked. Something had shifted in his face. Not enough for most people to notice. But she noticed. We'd work out the details, he'd said. No, she'd said. Thank you. But no. He had stood there for another moment. Mrs. Carter, he'd said, and his voice had changed. Not threatening exactly, but the performance of reasonableness had stepped aside to let something older and colder have a moment. I want you to think carefully about what you're choosing. I am thinking carefully, she'd told him. That's why I'm saying no. He had left. She had stood in the paddock with the long line in her hands until she heard his horse leave the road, and then she had sat down on the ground, simply sat down right there in the dirt, because her legs had decided they needed a moment. She told Whitfield all of this. He listened with a stillness that intensified as she went on. When she finished, he said, "He came alone, without Pruitt, without warning. Yes, that means he's concerned enough that he didn't want witnesses to the conversation. That's what I thought. Which means he's worried about what you know." Whitfield looked at her with something that might on a different face have been admiration. "He came to see how much you understood, and you didn't tell him anything." "I didn't know how much I understood at that point," Evelyn said honestly. "I just knew I didn't trust him." "That's better than understanding," Whitfield said. "Understanding can be reasoned away. Instinct is harder to argue with." He stood up. "Now take me to see the horse." He watched Dusty for 20 minutes without speaking, which Evelyn had started to recognize as what serious people did when they were seeing something worth taking seriously. Then he turned and walked back to the fence and said, "All right, here's what we're going to do." The next 8 weeks were the hardest of Evelyn's life, and she had lived through some genuinely hard ones. The conditioning work continued Samuel there 3 mornings a week, and Evelyn working Dusty herself every other day, the program building deliberately toward the specific demands of the championship trials course. Dusty responded to it the way she responded to everything, with that patient, intelligent determination that Evelyn had loved in her from the beginning and had come to rely on in a way that went beyond the professional. Whitfield worked in parallel, pulling records, writing letters, building the legal argument that he still described as a hedge rather than a guarantee. Arthur Holt sent a formal written confirmation from Cheyenne, notarized and precise, establishing the Silver Creek lineage to the satisfaction of anyone who understood what they were reading. Samuel made 3 trips into town and 1 trip to Casper in those weeks, following threads in old records with the specific obsession of someone who knows that the difference between a story and the truth is documentation. And Blackwood moved. He moved the way Evelyn had expected him to, and in ways she hadn't. The expected things first. A letter from the bank, or rather from Blackwood, through the bank's framework, noting that under the terms of the transferred mortgage, certain maintenance obligations had not been fully met, and requesting immediate inspection of the property. Whitfield handled this with 2 letters and a reference to a county ordinance that Blackwood apparently hadn't known existed, which bought them 3 more weeks. Then the unexpected. It was Cody who heard it first, because Cody was 19 and invisible in the way young men who work hard and say little tend to be invisible, and invisible people hear things. He came to Evelyn on a Wednesday morning with his hat in his hands and a look on his face that she had learned to pay attention to. "There's talk at the feed store," he said. "And at the saloon I wasn't drinking, ma'am, I was just—" "I know," she said. "Tell me." "People are saying the mare is unsound, that she never fully recovered from whatever she had, that she's going to come up lame in the trials, and it's going to be embarrassing, and—" He stopped. "Mrs. Carter, they're saying you know this and you're entering her anyway." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Who's saying it?" Cody shifted his weight. "I heard Pruitt's name twice, and a man named Ganner, who I know works a lease on Blackwood's north property. So it was a campaign. Not a single act of sabotage, but a sustained effort to undermine Dusty's credibility before she ever set foot on a competition course. It was, she had to admit, intelligent. You didn't need to stop the horse from running if you could make sure that everyone who watched her run was already prepared to discount what they saw. She told Samuel. Samuel told her he had already heard 3 versions of the story from 3 different people over the previous week, and had been deciding how to raise it with her. "He's trying to shape the narrative before we can establish it," Samuel said. "If people believe the horse is unsound, going in, even a strong performance gets attributed to luck or adrenaline. What do? We invite people to come and see her work," Samuel said. "Not Blackwood's people, neutral people. People who know horses and who know the difference between a fit horse and a compromised one." He looked at her. "There's a man named George Beckett. He's a circuit judge for the regional horse associations. He was at the fair in Casper 2 years ago, and he judged the working horse exhibition there. He's respected. He has no connection to Blackwood that I know of. Can we get him here? I think if I write to him and explain that we have a horse, We believe to be a confirmed Silver Creek mare, and we'd like an independent assessment. He'll come," Samuel said. "That bloodline is worth the trip. For a man like Beckett, seeing a confirmed Silver Creek horse is like he searched for the right comparison. It's like a historian being offered a look at a document everyone believed was lost." "Write to him," Evelyn said. Beckett came 2 weeks before the trials. He was a tall, angular man, gray-haired and deliberate, and he watched Dusty work for 40 minutes longer than Samuel had watched, longer than Whitfield had watched, in a silence so complete that Evelyn found herself holding her breath at intervals. Then he said, "Bring her in." Evelyn brought Dusty to the fence. Beckett ran his hands along her shoulder, her legs, her chest. He checked her teeth. He stepped back and watched her stand. He asked Evelyn to walk her, then trot her, then walk her again. He made no sounds and no expressions during any of this, which Evelyn was finding increasingly difficult to read. Finally, he straightened. "Who's been conditioning her?" he asked. "Samuel Dawson primarily," Evelyn said, "and myself." Beckett looked at Samuel with a respect that seemed genuine. "The program is right," he said. "The horse is right. She's not unsound, she's not compromised, and she's not undertrained." A pause. "She is also not a typical competition horse. She doesn't move like what the judges usually see." Evelyn's heart dropped slightly. "That's a problem?" she asked. "It could be," Beckett said honestly, "if the judges aren't paying attention. It won't be if they are." He looked at Dusty again. "She doesn't waste anything. Every step is exactly what it needs to be, and nothing more. Judges who are watching for flashiness will undervalue her. Judges who are watching for efficiency will see what she is." He glanced at Evelyn. "Who are the assigned judges for October?" "I don't know," she admitted. Beckett nodded slowly. "Find out." He left her with that, and with a written assessment, 1 page, precise and unsparing, that confirmed Dusty was in good health, showing no signs of lameness or respiratory compromise, and that her conditioning was appropriate for championship trials competition. He signed it with his full title and credentials. Evelyn read it twice, and then folded it carefully and put it with the lineage documentation in the box she had started keeping under her bed. The box was getting heavy. She found out the judges' names through Samuel, who found out through Beckett, who had 30 years of connections in the horse community and was willing to use them on Dusty's behalf, for reasons that Evelyn wasn't entirely sure of, and had decided not to interrogate. 3 judges assigned to the championship trials. 2 of them Samuel knew by reputation, serious men experienced the kind that Beckett's evaluation suggested would not be distracted by surface qualities. The 3rd name made Samuel go quiet in a way that told her immediately. "Who is he?" she asked. "His name is Patterson," Samuel said. "He's been a circuit judge for 7 years. He's competent. He's—" a pause. "He's also one of Nathaniel Blackwood's preferred guests at the Blackwood Ranch every autumn hunting season. Has been for 5 years." The kitchen seemed to compress slightly. "He's Blackwood's man," Evelyn said. "I don't know that he would act improperly," Samuel said in the tone of someone who very much does not want to believe the thing he suspects. "But a 3rd judge has significant influence on a split decision. If the other 2 judges score Dusty highly and Patterson scores her low, the split goes to whomever Patterson favors." "Yes." Evelyn stood up and walked to the window. She was not a person who believed the world was organized against her. She had never found that belief useful or true in her experience. But she was standing in the specific intersection of circumstances where the deck was stacked so clearly and deliberately that pretending otherwise would have been a kind of willful blindness that she simply could not afford. She turned around. "We need to make sure she performs so well that a low score from one judge is indefensible," she said. Samuel looked at her for a moment. "That's a high bar." "I know what bar it is," she said. "Can she clear it?" He took his time with the answer. "If everything goes right," he said. "If she's sound on the day. If the endurance component plays the way I think it will. If—" He stopped. "Yes, I believe she can clear it. Then we make sure everything goes right, Evelyn said. The week before the trials, Blackwood made his final move. She did not see it coming from the direction it came from, which told her later that he was smarter than she had been giving him credit for, or that desperation had made him creative. Cody found it. He was checking the stable at first light, which was his habit, and he came to the kitchen door at a speed that brought Evelyn off her chair before he had finished knocking. "The water," he said. "The trough in Dusty's stall. There's something in it." She was in the stable in 30 seconds. The water in the trough was discolored slightly subtly, the kind of thing you would not notice in poor light or if you were moving fast. But Cody had been looking carefully the way she had taught him to look, and he had seen it. She did not let Dusty near it. She pulled the mare back, checked her, watched her for the tight-eyed, careful way a person watches an animal for signs of distress. Dusty seemed unbothered. She had been at the far end of the stall when Cody arrived and had not been drinking when he checked. They emptied the trough and scrubbed it and filled it fresh, and Evelyn sent Cody to bring Samuel while she stayed with Dusty. Samuel came quickly, and he brought Whitfield, who happened to be at Samuel's property reviewing documents, and who arrived with a glass jar and a methodical expression. He took a sample of what remained in the bottom of the trough before they completed the scrubbing. "What is it?" Evelyn asked. "I don't know yet," Whitfield said. "I know a man in Cheyenne who can tell us." He sealed the jar. "I also need to know if you had anyone here last night after Cody left." "No," Evelyn said. "Just me. And your fence line, the stable door?" She checked. The latch on the stable's side door, not the main door, the smaller door at the north end that she rarely used, showed fresh marks on the wood. Not dramatic. Just the kind of scuffing that happens when someone is working a latch in the dark. Whitfield looked at it for a long time. "He sent someone," he said quietly. "Or someone came on their own initiative. Either way." He straightened. "This changes our position." "How?" Evelyn asked. "Because now it isn't just a business dispute," Whitfield said. "It isn't just a foreclosure and a disputed lineage and a competition we're trying to win. Now someone has tampered with your animal's water supply 1 week before the most important competition of her life." He looked at her steadily. "That is a criminal act, Mrs. Carter, and I intend to document it." Evelyn's hands were shaking slightly and she gripped the fence rail to steady them. Dusty was beside her, warm and real and utterly herself. And Evelyn put her hand on the mare's neck, the way she always did, and felt the horse lean into the contact. She had been sold for $25. She had been called worthless and written off and sent down to a county auction where the crowd laughed at the idea of spending anything on her at all. And now, a man who owned thousands of acres and the finest horses in the territory was sending someone in the dark to put something in her water because even now, even after everything, he was afraid of her. Because she deserved to be afraid of. That thought did something to the shaking in Evelyn's hands. It steadied them. "Document everything," she told Whitfield. "Every detail," he confirmed. "And I want the sheriff involved," she said. Whitfield nodded. "I was going to suggest that." "Today," she said. "Not tomorrow. Today." Cody was already at the door, hat in hand, reading her face the way he'd learned to read it over 18 months of working beside her. "I'll go right now," he said. "Take the road fast," she told him. "Don't stop." He was gone before she finished the sentence. She turned back to Dusty. The mare was watching her with those dark eyes that Evelyn had first seen over an auction fence and had never fully been able to look away from since. "7 days," she said quietly. The mare's ear moved toward her voice. "7 days," Evelyn said again. "And then we go show them." The sheriff came that afternoon. His name was Harlan Cole, a man in his 50s who had held the position for 12 years and who had the particular quality of long-experienced law enforcement everywhere, a patience so thorough that it could be mistaken for slowness, and an observation that missed very little. He looked at the stable door. He looked at the jar Whitfield had prepared. He wrote things in his notebook with a deliberateness that Evelyn found, under the circumstances, genuinely reassuring. "You believe this was deliberately done," he said. "I believe someone came through that side door last night and put something in my horse's water trough," Evelyn said. "I'll let you draw your own conclusions about deliberate." Cole looked at the latch marks again. "Any idea who—" Evelyn said nothing. Cole glanced at Whitfield, who said nothing. Cole wrote something in his notebook. "I'll want to talk to some people," he said. "I expect you will," Whitfield said. Cole looked at Evelyn. "You're running this horse in the championship trials next week." "I am," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You make sure she's ready," he said, "and you make sure she's not left alone between now and then." "Understood," she said. He left. Samuel stayed. Whitfield stayed. Cody stayed bedding down in the stable that night with a lantern and a rifle that Evelyn had not asked him to bring and was grateful to see anyway. She sat in the kitchen until past midnight, going through the documentation in the box under her bed, with a kind of focused calm that she recognized as her mind's response to threat, not paralysis, not panic, but a narrowing of attention to what mattered and what could be done about it. What could be done about it was go to the trials, run the horse, let the story tell itself. In the 5 days before the championship trials, Nathaniel Blackwood sent no more intermediaries. No letters came from the bank. Pruitt was not seen on the road near her ranch. The specific quality of silence that settled over those 5 days was not peaceful. It was the silence of something gathering itself, of a situation, moving toward its conclusion, with the particular momentum that built. Situations develop when they have run too long to stop. On the last evening, Evelyn sat with Dusty in the stable for a long time, longer than she usually allowed herself to sit still. She ran her hands over the mare's shoulders, her legs the deep chest that the breeding records described, and that Arthur Holt's letter confirmed. She checked everything a person who knew horses checks when they are about to ask one to perform. Dusty was sound. Dusty was fit. Dusty was ready in the way that a creature that has survived everything it has survived and come through with its essential nature intact is always finally ready. "I don't know if we win tomorrow," Evelyn said. Dusty breathed steadily. "I know what winning would mean. I know what we're going to do with it." She was quiet for a moment. "But I also know that you've already proven everything that matters. You've already shown me what you are. Whatever happens tomorrow, nothing takes that back." She put her forehead against the mare's neck. Dusty stood completely still. Outside, Cody was at his post, and the lantern threw its quiet light across the stable, and the night was the specific kind of still that precedes significant things. Not an empty still, but a full one, charged with everything that had been building toward the morning. Evelyn Carter breathed slowly. She thought of Thomas. She thought of $25 on an auctioneer's table. She thought of laughter. And then she stopped thinking about all of it and just stayed present with the horse that nobody wanted on the last night before everything would be decided. The morning of the Wyoming Championship, horse trials arrived, the way important mornings always do, ordinary. At first, just light coming through the stable cracks. Just the sound of Dusty moving in her stall. Just Cody already awake and pouring water from the bucket he'd kept fresh through the night. Evelyn had not slept much. She had not expected to. She was dressed before the sun was fully up, her good coat, the one she saved for occasions that required her to look like someone who had not spent the previous 6 months fighting for her life, buttoned to the collar. Her hair done the way Thomas used to say, made her look like she meant business. She went to Dusty first before coffee, before anything. The mare was alert and bright-eyed, which was the first thing Evelyn checked and the first relief of the morning. No stiffness. No hesitation when she moved across the stall. She pushed her nose against Evelyn's shoulder in the greeting that had become theirs over these months, and Evelyn stood with her hand pressed flat against the mare's neck and let herself have 30 seconds of something that felt almost like peace. "Today," she said. Dusty's ear turned toward her. "Today we go." Samuel arrived at 6, which was earlier than they'd agreed, which told Evelyn he hadn't slept well either. He said nothing about it. He checked Dusty with the same systematic attention he always brought, and found the same thing Evelyn had found. And the look he exchanged with her across the stall was the look of two people who have invested everything in the same thing and are standing at the moment of reckoning. Cody hitched the transport without being asked. Whitfield met them at the fairgrounds. He was already there when they arrived, standing at the registration table with his leather satchel and the expression of a man who has done everything that can be done and is now waiting to see what the world does in response. He took Evelyn aside while Cody and Samuel handled Dusty's arrival logistics. "Cole talked to two of Blackwood's ranch hands last night," he said low and direct. "He hasn't got a confession, but he's got enough inconsistencies in their accounts of Tuesday evening that he's treating the water incident as an open investigation." "What does that mean for today?" Evelyn asked. "It means Blackwood knows he's being watched," Whitfield said. "It means anything he tries today, he tries in public in front of witnesses at an event that the county press is covering." He paused. "It also means he's likely to try nothing today and everything tomorrow in the legal arena, which is where we need to be prepared." "One thing at a time," Evelyn said. "Agreed," he said. "Win today." She almost smiled. "Just like that." "Just like that," he said, completely serious. The fairgrounds were already filling when Evelyn walked Dusty through the registration process, and she felt the looks before she saw them, the particular quality of attention that comes when a crowd has been told a story about someone and is now encountering the person the story was told about. She heard her name twice in conversations she was not supposed to hear. She heard Dusty's purchase price, once $25, said in a tone that carried the whole weight of what that number had come to mean in this county over the past months. She kept walking. She kept her head up and her pace even, which was harder than it looked, and which she had been practicing not consciously, but through the accumulated weight of every time she had walked out of a room that had just been talking about her and refused to let them see it land. There were 11 horses entered in the championship trials. 5 of them were serious contenders. The kind of animals that competed at this level regularly, that had training histories and competition records and handlers who knew exactly what they were doing. Nathaniel Blackwood's entry was a gray stallion named Territory King, and he was, Evelyn had to admit when she saw him, a magnificent animal. He stood a full hand taller than Dusty, built for power and speed, with the particular confidence of a horse that has always been treated like what it is, the most important animal in any room it enters. Blackwood was there. Of course he was there. He was standing with a group of men near the stallion's area, dressed expensively, and talking with the ease of someone who is entirely comfortable with where he stands in any given hierarchy. And when he saw Evelyn leading Dusty toward the competitor registration, he went quiet. The men around him noticed and went quiet too, and for a moment the whole cluster of them watched her walk past. Evelyn did not look at him. She did not look away from him dramatically either. She simply walked where she was going, because that was the only direction available and the only one worth taking. She heard his voice behind her, quiet, and directed at no one in particular. "That mare's going to show the county what $25 buys you." Someone laughed. Evelyn walked on. The first phase of the championship trials was confirmation and movement evaluation. The horses were presented individually before the 3 judges. She could see them at the elevated platform. 2 men she didn't recognize, and the third, Patterson Blackwood's hunting guest, who sat slightly apart from the other 2, with the specific posture of a man who knows his position and is comfortable in it. When it was Dusty's turn, Evelyn led her into the presentation area and put her through the required movements with the calm efficiency they'd practiced for months. Dusty was extraordinary. Not in the way that Territory King was extraordinary. Not in size, not in drama. Not in the kind of showy performance that makes a crowd gasp. She was extraordinary in the way that precision is extraordinary to someone who understands what precision costs. Every movement was exact. Every transition was clean. She carried herself with a quality of self-possession that Evelyn had come to think of as distinctly Dusty, not arrogance, not display, but a settled certainty about what she was and what she was capable of. 2 of the judges leaned forward. Patterson wrote something without looking up. Samuel, standing at the fence, said nothing, but she saw his jaw release slightly, which was his version of relief. The scores for the first phase went up an hour later. Dusty scored 8.4 from Judge Mercer, 8.7 from Judge Aldridge, 5.9 from Patterson. The number went through the crowd like something thrown. 5.9, for a performance that had made two experienced judges lean forward in their chairs. Evelyn stood at the scoring board and looked at the number and felt something move through her. Not surprise because Whitfield had told her to expect it, but a cold fury at the brazenness of it. 5.9 was not a judgment. It was an instruction. It said this horse does not win today. Samuel appeared at her shoulder. "We knew," he said quietly. "I knew," she said. "It's different seeing it." "Yes," he said, "it is." A pause. Mercer and Aldridge are the deciding voices if the endurance component plays out the way I think it will. Patterson can score her 0 in the final phase, and it won't matter if the other two scores are where they need to be. We need Dusty to run so well that the split is indefensible, Evelyn said. It was what she'd said weeks ago in her kitchen, and it was still true. Yes, Samuel said. The second phase was the working horse evaluation, a series of tasks designed to measure responsiveness, intelligence, and handler relationship. This was the phase that Evelyn had been both most confident about and most quietly anxious over, because it was the most subjective, the most dependent on the judge's individual interpretations, and therefore the most vulnerable to the kind of influence that Patterson represented. She took Dusty into the working arena and they ran through the sequence. It went better than practice. That was the thing about Dusty that Evelyn could never fully explain to anyone who hadn't witnessed it under pressure. The horse improved. Under the eyes of the crowd with the noise and the other horses and the specific tension of a competitive setting, something in her focused and clarified in a way that practice, however good, only approximated. It was as though competition reminded her of something she already knew about herself. When they finished the sequence, there was a sound from the crowd that Evelyn had not heard at any previous point in the day. Not applause exactly. More like a collective exhale followed by the murmur of people turning to each other. She heard a woman near the fence say quite clearly, "I've never seen anything move like that." The second phase scores 8.6 from Mercer, 9.1 from Aldridge, 4.8 from Patterson. In the crowd, someone said it aloud, not quietly, not carefully, but with the flat declarative tone of someone stating an obvious fact. "That's not a score. That's a fix." The murmur that followed was different from the earlier one. Evelyn heard Whitfield's voice, steady and unhurried somewhere to her left. "That's exactly what we needed them to say." The endurance component was the final phase and the longest. The course ran 12 miles through terrain that tested stamina, soundness, and the deep physical reserves that separated genuinely fit horses from horses that had been trained to look fit. It was the component that Blackwood's Territory King had won in 2 of the previous 3 championship trials. It was the component that Samuel had been building Dusty toward for 4 months. And it was the component that, under the specific rules of the Wyoming Championship, was weighted heaviest in the final scoring. The 11 horses entered the start together. Territory King went forward immediately with the controlled explosion of a horse that has been trained to establish position early, and he was 3 lengths clear within the first quarter mile. His form was impeccable. His handler, a professional who had been working with Blackwood's horses for a decade, rode with the confidence of someone whose job it is to win and who intends to do it. Evelyn did not chase him. She had told Dusty the same thing she'd told her in practice for 4 months not yet. Find your pace. Run your race, not his. Dusty settled into a stride that was from the outside entirely unremarkable. It was not fast. It was not dramatic. It was simply perfect. The same efficient, waste-nothing movement that had made Beckett go quiet at the fence 2 weeks earlier now applied across 12 miles of terrain that had already claimed 2 horses by the 3rd mile, one pulling up lame near the creek crossing, one refusing a section of rocky incline that Dusty navigated without breaking rhythm. At the halfway point, Territory King was still leading. Still leading, but something had changed. Samuel was at the midpoint marker, and Evelyn caught his eye as she passed. He said nothing. He lifted 2 fingers in a gesture so small that no one else would have read it, and she understood the stallion is working harder than he should be at this point. She had heard Samuel say it 100 times over 4 months. Endurance is not about speed. It is about economy. The horse that expends exactly what is necessary and nothing more will always outlast the horse that spends what it has to spare. Territory. King had been spending. By the 8th mile it was visible. The stallion's stride shortened almost imperceptibly, the kind of shortening that a trained eye sees and an untrained eye misses, and his handler shifted his riding position in the small ways that tell you a person is managing a horse rather than riding one. He was still ahead. He was still moving well enough to win on paper. But the 8th mile looked different from the first, and Dusty's 8th mile looked exactly like her first. The crowd had gathered thick along the final section of the course. They had come for Territory King, most of them. They had come to watch the horse that won 2 of the last 3 championships do what he had done before. They had come to see Blackwood's money justify itself. What they saw instead was a gray stallion beginning to labor, and a dusty brown mare who appeared by some impossible standard to be only now hitting her stride. Evelyn felt it happen. She had felt it in practice, and she had wondered privately whether she would feel it in competition or whether competition would change it somehow. But it was exactly the same this particular moment when Dusty shifted not to a different gear exactly, but to a truer expression of what she was. Like she'd been running at 80% and now decided that 80% was no longer required. They came around the final turn with 3/4 of a mile to the finish. Territory King was still 2 lengths ahead, and Dusty began to close, not dramatically, not with the explosive burst that the crowd would have found easier to understand. She closed the way a tide closes steadily, inevitably, without hesitation, as though the outcome had already been decided, and this was simply the time it took to make it visible. The crowd saw it. The crowd understood it before the handlers did, before the judges did, in the instinctive way that crowds understand something when the narrative of a moment overtakes all the other stories being told about it. People were shouting, not for Territory King, not for Blackwood, not for the horse they had come expecting to watch win. They were shouting for the horse they were watching run, because what Dusty was doing in those final 3/4 of a mile was not just competing. It was answering every question that had been asked about her since a June afternoon in an auction yard when the crowd laughed and a widow stepped forward. She caught Territory King at the half-mile mark. For perhaps 30 seconds, they ran side by side, and Evelyn heard the handler pushing the stallion, heard the specific sounds of a horse being asked for more than it has left, and she felt under her the absolute opposite, a horse that had more and was choosing this moment to use it. She said the word she'd been saving. Now. And Dusty gave her now. The distance that opened in the final 1/4 mile was not large. It did not need to be large. The finish line required only 1 nose in front, and Dusty crossed it with something to spare, and the crowd made a sound that Evelyn felt in her sternum. She brought Dusty to a walk and then let her stop and stood beside her in the middle of the noise, with her hand flat on the mare's neck and her eyes closed for just a moment, just long enough to let herself understand what had just happened. "Good girl," she said, which was entirely inadequate. Dusty breathed. They walked toward the finish area, and the crowd parted in a way that crowds part when something significant has just happened, and the person at the center of it is moving through. People she had never met were speaking to her. People she recognized from town, from the mercantile, from the auction yard itself, were looking at her with expressions that had traveled a long way from where they'd started. She heard her name repeated in many different voices, in many different tones, and she walked through all of it with her hand on Dusty's neck and her eyes forward, because that was the only way she knew how to do anything. Samuel found her at the enclosure gate. His eyes were bright in the way that old men's eyes go bright when they have waited a long time for something and it has finally arrived. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "That horse just changed every story that's been told about her." "Yes," Evelyn said, "and every story that's been told about you." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Ask me after the final scores." The final scores took 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, Evelyn stood with Dusty and Cody and Samuel and Whitfield and said very little, and the four of them held a kind of collective stillness that was its own form of communication. Cody, who was not a demonstrative young man, had been blinking more than usual since the finish line. Samuel had his hands in his coat pockets and was looking at the ground with the expression of someone conducting an interior conversation. Whitfield reviewed papers from his satchel with the composure of a man who had trained himself not to feel things prematurely. Then the judges' platform convened. Then the numbers appeared. Dusty's aggregate score across all three phases. Mercer, 8.6 overall. Aldridge, 9.1 overall. Patterson, 5.2 overall. Territory Kings aggregate. Mercer, 8.1. Aldridge, 8.3. Patterson, 9.4. Under the championship rules, the aggregate was calculated as the mean of the three judges' scores. Dusty, 7.63. Territory King, 8.6. The announcement went through the crowd like a physical force. Blackwood's horse had won, on paper, because of one judge's scores which diverged from the other two by margins that were not just unusual. They were, as Evelyn heard a man near her say, in a voice that was not trying to be quiet, statistically impossible to justify from the performance she'd just seen. For a moment, just a moment, the world tilted, and then Whitfield was at her side with his satchel already open and his jaw set and his voice in her ear. "This is exactly what we needed." She looked at him. "Patterson just gave us everything," he said. Both horses performed. The crowd saw both horses perform. 2 out of 3 judges scored Dusty higher in every competitive phase, and Patterson's scores are so inconsistent with what every person at this event witnessed that they cannot survive scrutiny. His voice was rapid and precise. "I'm filing a formal protest with the championship officials within the hour. The protest invokes the conflict of interest provision. Blackwood's annual hunting arrangement with Patterson is a documented known social relationship, and it was not disclosed to the other judges or to competitors before the event. That disclosure is required by the championship charter." Evelyn stared at him. "Can we win the protest?" "We have a stronger case for the protest than we do for almost anything else I've built in the past 4 months," he said. "And Beckett is here. I spoke to him 20 minutes ago. He's willing to submit an independent assessment as supporting evidence." He paused. "There's one more thing. The crowd is angry." She looked out at the fairgrounds. He was right. The murmur that had started when Patterson's first scores appeared had not dissipated. It had grown. She could hear it, not the ambient noise of a crowd disbanding, but the specific, sustained sound of collective disbelief gathering itself into something with direction and intention. She saw people she recognized arguing with people she didn't. She saw competitors' handlers gesturing at the scoring board with expressions that had nothing diplomatic in them. She saw the county newspaper's correspondent, a young man named Fletcher, who had covered every championship for the past 3 years, writing in his notebook with what appeared to be unusual speed. "Fletcher's been at every event," she said. "He has," Whitfield said. And he watched Patterson's scores go up in real time while standing next to Arthur Holt, who had driven down from Cheyenne specifically to see this horse run. I spoke to Holt as well. He's prepared to speak on record about the Silver Creek lineage documentation. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been building a structure for months and is watching it find its own weight. "Mrs. Carter, we did not win the championship today, but I believe we won something considerably harder to take back." Before she could respond, there was a shift in the crowd nearby. A specific kind of shift, the kind made by a large man moving through people who step aside. Nathaniel Blackwood. He was alone. No Pruitt, no associates, no performance of reasonableness with hat in hand. He walked toward her with the contained expression of a man who has gotten what he wanted and is trying to look like that was always the plan, but something in his eyes told a different story. He stopped at a distance that was too close for a casual exchange and too far for a private one. "Your horse ran well," he said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "She did. I want you to know the result is what it is. His voice was careful, deliberate. "I won this championship fairly." "You won it," Evelyn agreed. "Mr. Whitfield is reviewing whether it was fairly." Something moved in Blackwood's face. "You don't have the grounds." "He believes we do," Evelyn said. "Patterson's conflict of interest wasn't disclosed. That's in the charter. It's been in the charter since 1879. She held his gaze. "I looked it up." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the crowd's attention had shifted in that particular way. Attention shifts in small communities, slowly and then completely, until the conversation happening in this specific spot was the only one that seemed to matter. "This will go badly for you," Blackwood said. "Lower now. Not a performance anymore. I hold your mortgage. I can call it due within 30 days under the transfer terms. You go forward with a protest. You're making an enemy of the only person standing between you and losing that land." She felt the words land. She let them land. She did not step back. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, and her voice was the same voice she'd used when she put $25 on an auctioneer's table, with her hands shaking and her jaw set, and the entire yard laughing around her, calm and clear and completely committed. "You sold that horse, through your partner, under a misrepresented lineage, at a price that reflected your failure to understand what you had. I bought her for $25, and I brought her back from the edge of dying, and I trained her, and I brought her here today, and every person at this event watched her run." She paused. "The story is already out of your hands. It's been out of your hands for a while. You just haven't been willing to see it." He stared at her. The crowd was entirely silent. Fletcher was writing in his notebook. Arthur Holt, she noticed, had moved to a position where he could hear. Beckett was 20 feet away, watching with his arms crossed. "You're making a mistake," Blackwood said, but the certainty in it had shifted. It sounded for the first time since she'd known of him like a man who was not entirely sure he was right. "I made a mistake once," Evelyn said. "I let myself believe that a horse was only worth what the room it was in decided to pay for it. I learned different." She met his eyes one final time. "I hope you learn different too eventually. It's a useful thing to know." She turned and walked back to Dusty. The mare was standing with Cody's hand on her neck, calm and unhurried, and entirely herself. And when Evelyn reached her, Dusty turned her head and pushed her nose against Evelyn's shoulder, the way she always had, the way she had since those early, careful weeks when trust was being built, one quiet morning at a time. Whitfield appeared at her side. "That conversation was witnessed by at least 40 people," he said, "including Fletcher." "I know," she said. "He just threatened you in public. I know that too." "That's going to matter tomorrow," Whitfield said. "In the protest filing, and in the mortgage dispute." He paused. "He just handed us the narrative." Samuel was on her other side. "The protest has to go in today," he said, "before end-of-day registration." "Then go," she told Whitfield. He went. She stood with Samuel and Cody and Dusty while the fairgrounds continued their noise around them, and she felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from months of sustained tension, finally reaching its moment of release. Not resolution, yet. Not victory, yet, but the specific relief of having done everything that could be done and having done it right. "You know what they're saying," Samuel said after a while. "What are they saying?" "Fletcher's already talking to people." Beckett gave him 20 minutes. Samuel looked at her sideways. "The story they're telling about today isn't the official result. It's the mare that outran the champion and had the trophy taken from her by a fixed judge." Evelyn looked at the scoring board still visible from where they stood. "Is that the true story?" she asked. "It is the story that every person at this event experienced," Samuel said. "And in the morning, when Fletcher's account runs in the county paper, it will be the story that everyone in Wyoming experiences." She thought about Blackwood's face when she'd finished speaking. That shift in his expression. That infinitesimal withdrawal of certainty. She thought about the charter provision Whitfield had found 3 weeks ago, and which she had read twice a day since, not because she didn't understand it, but because she wanted to know it the way she knew the price she'd paid for Dusty, The way you know the things that matter when you know they matter. "Samuel," she said. "Ma'am." "Do you think the protest will hold?" He was quiet for a long time in the careful, honest way he was quiet when he was giving her the real answer, and not the comfortable one. "I think Nathaniel Blackwood is a man who has spent 30 years being the most important person in every room he entered," Samuel said finally. "And I think today was the first day that was visibly no longer true." He paused. "Men like that make mistakes when they're frightened. They've never had to be careful before because careful was never necessary." He looked at her. "He's going to make a mistake, Mrs. Carter. He already started. That conversation with Fletcher watching is going to cost him considerably more than he understands right now." She nodded. She stroked Dusty's nose. The mare sighed the deep, settled sigh of a horse that has run hard and run well and knows it, and Evelyn felt that sigh move through her own chest like something releasing. "Then we go home," she said, "and we wait for him to finish making it." Fletcher's article ran the next morning. Evelyn read it at her kitchen table before the coffee was finished, and she read it twice, and then she set it down and sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with something that has finally said out loud what you already knew, but had not yet heard spoken by anyone else. Fletcher was 26 years old and had been covering county news since he was 22, and in 4 years he had written mostly about grain prices and land disputes and the occasional cattle theft. But he had watched something at the Wyoming Championship horse trials that had reached past his professional habits and grabbed him somewhere more personal, and it showed in every line of what he wrote. He described Dusty's performance in the endurance phase with the precise and unsparing attention of someone who understood what he had seen. He described Patterson's scores alongside Mercer's and Aldridge's without editorial comment. And he did not need editorial comment because the numbers made their own argument to anyone with eyes. He quoted Arthur Holt on the Silver Creek lineage 4 sentences that were careful and credentialed and worth more than 4 paragraphs of opinion. He quoted Beckett on Dusty's conditioning and soundness. He quoted 3 separate competitors who had watched the final phase from different positions along the course and who all said in their different ways the same thing. And at the end, in a final paragraph that Evelyn read 3 times, he wrote about a widow who had stood in a county auction yard 14 months earlier and spent her last $25 on a horse that every experienced rancher in the territory had decided was beyond saving, and who had then proceeded to bring that horse to the Wyoming Championship horse trials and watch her outrun a champion before a fixed judge's scores took the trophy away. He did not call Patterson a fixed judge. He did not use those words. He didn't have to. By noon, every person in Fremont County who could read had read the article. By 2 in the afternoon, Evelyn had received 4 visitors she had not expected neighbors, 2 of whom had laughed at the auction, 1 of whom had told Florence Webb that grief had made Evelyn lose her mind, and 1 who had simply quietly turned away. They came to her door one at a time, and they said different things in different words, and she received each of them with the same steady courtesy, because she was not a woman who found satisfaction in other people's embarrassment, and because what she needed now was not vindication from individuals, but a legal outcome that would settle this entirely. Whitfield called that satisfaction privately premature. He came to her that afternoon with the protest filing confirmation and a face that told her the confirmation was not the whole story. "The championship officials have accepted the protest for review," he said, sitting at the kitchen table. "They've requested Patterson's official scoring notes, and they've asked Mercer and Aldridge to submit independent written assessments of their scoring rationale." He set a document in front of her. "This is the standard review process. It takes between 2 and 4 weeks. "And the mortgage?" Evelyn asked. Whitfield's expression shifted in the specific way it shifted when he was about to tell her something he would rather not tell her. "He filed the 30-day notice this morning," he said. "Before Fletcher's article ran, or possibly while it was running. The timing is close enough that I'm not certain he'd seen it yet. $240 due in 30 days, or the foreclosure process begins." Evelyn set down her coffee cup. 30 days. "Can you stop it?" she asked. "I can slow it," Whitfield said. "The conflict of interest argument, the same one we're using in the protest, applies to the mortgage as well." He acquired your note while he was the undisclosed prior owner of your primary asset, and while he was actively pursuing that asset through intermediaries. There's a case that the mortgage acquisition itself was improper. He paused. It's not a simple case. I want you to understand that. A judge could find for us or against us on it, depending on what we can establish and how quickly. How quickly can we establish it? I've requested a hearing in Laramie for next week, he said. The fastest I could get. She nodded. Evelyn, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name, which told her what was coming was something he felt required the weight of it. Whatever happens in Laramie, whatever happens with the protest, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that the legal outcomes take longer than 30 days. She looked at him. He may get the foreclosure process started before we can stop it, he said. The process doesn't mean you lose the ranch immediately. There are additional steps, but I want you to know it's possible so you're not blindsided. She sat with that. 30 days. $240 she did not have. A protest that would take 2 to 4 weeks and might not fully resolve in time. A legal challenge to the mortgage that was real and arguable and not certain. She looked at the document in front of her and thought about Dusty, who at this moment was in the stable eating her morning hay with the complete equanimity of an animal that does not know she is the center of a conflict that has consumed the better part of a year and a half. She thought about Samuel's hands on the records, 4 decades of careful work coming to bear on this specific situation. She thought about Cody sleeping in the stable with a lantern and a rifle because someone had tried to put something in her horse's water. She thought about what Whitfield had said at the fairgrounds when Patterson's scores had gone up and the crowd had gone silent. We did not win the championship today, but I believe we won something considerably harder to take back. All right, she said. What do we do next? And then the door knocked. It was not Samuel who would have called out before knocking. It was not Cody who was working the north fence. It was 2 men she did not recognize, which was unusual enough in Fremont County that she noted it before she opened the door fully, and then she saw the third figure behind them and understood. Arthur Holt had driven down from Cheyenne again. He was standing on her porch with his hat in his hands, and the expression of a man who has decided something on the drive down and is not going to be talked out of it. Mrs. Carter, he said, I hope you'll forgive the lack of notice. These gentlemen are associates of mine from Denver. I'd like to introduce them if I may. She opened the door wider. Holt introduced them at the kitchen table. The first was a man named Crawford, a horse breeder from Colorado, with a reputation Samuel had mentioned once in passing as the kind that precedes a person into rooms before they arrive. The second was a man named Reeves, who turned out to be a lawyer, though not the kind who handled mortgage disputes, the kind who handled breeding rights and bloodline documentation, and the specific legal architecture of equine heritage. Crawford had seen Dusty run yesterday. Reeves had read Fletcher's article this morning. Holt had called them both before the sun was fully up. I want to be direct with you, Crawford said. He was a straightforward man. She could see that immediately, the kind who had gotten where he was by saying what he meant and meaning what he said. I watched that mare run 12 miles yesterday, and I've been breeding horses for 23 years, and I have never seen what I saw in that final quarter mile. That is not an easy thing for me to say, because I have some very fine horses, and I am not in the habit of being impressed by animals I haven't produced. He looked at her steadily. What is her confirmation status? The Silver Creek lineage, is it fully documented? Arthur's letter notarized, Evelyn said. His documentation package matches the original breeding records at 4 distinct points. Crawford looked at Holt, who nodded. Then I want to make you an offer, Crawford said. Not for the horse. I want to be clear, I'm not trying to buy her. The offer is for a breeding partnership. I provide the capital to manage your current debt obligations and fund the development of a proper breeding operation on your property. In exchange, I receive first rights on 2 foals per breeding season over the next 5 years, with the lineage documented under the Silver Creek name through Holt's records. He paused. The terms are negotiable. But I wanted to come here today in person to make sure you understood that what you have, what you saw in that horse, is not a county matter. It is not even a territory matter. It is a national matter. And the people who understand that are not going to let Nathaniel Blackwood bury it." The kitchen was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Holt. Holt said, "He's not wrong." She looked at Whitfield, who was looking at Crawford with the expression of a man rapidly recalculating. "The partnership capital," Whitfield said carefully. "Would that be sufficient to retire the existing mortgage obligation in full?" Crawford looked at him. "Sufficient and then some," he said. Whitfield wrote something on the page in front of him. Evelyn sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at the window that faced the stable, and thought about a morning 14 months ago, when she had put her last $25 on an auctioneer's table while everyone laughed. She thought about the long walk home. She thought about the lantern outside the stable, and Dusty eating carefully like an animal that had learned not to trust that the food would be there tomorrow. She thought about Thomas, and about the way he used to look at her when the whole world was telling her she was wrong about something. "Reeves," she said. The lawyer looked up. "Can you draft the partnership terms in a way that protects the horse?" Reeves was quiet for a moment. "Protects her how?" "She stays here," Evelyn said. "She is never sold, transferred, or relocated without my written consent. She is bred on my timeline, not a production schedule. And her name, the name I gave her, stays on every document that goes out of this partnership." She paused. "She came into this world meaning nothing to anyone who saw her. Whatever she becomes, I need it to be known that she was Dusty first, that she was worth something before anyone with money agreed that she was worth something." There was a silence in the kitchen that felt like the silence after something important has been said, and the room is deciding what to do with it. Reeves wrote something in his own notebook. "I can draft those terms," he said. Crawford looked at Evelyn for a long moment, and something in his face shifted in the direction of the look that Samuel had given her at the fence all those months ago. That particular combination of respect and recognition that she had come to understand meant someone was seeing her clearly for the first time. "All right," he said. "Then we have an agreement in principle. Reeves will have the draft terms to Mr. Whitfield by end of week." The hearing in Laramie happened 10 days later. Whitfield had built his case with the methodical precision that Evelyn had come to recognize as his fundamental nature, not spectacular, not dramatic, but airtight in a way that rewarded attention. He presented the sequence of events, the Silver Creek lineage and its undisclosed connection to Blackwood's Casper operation, the partnership arrangement under Cale's name, designed to obscure Blackwood's involvement, the acquisition of Evelyn's mortgage by the undisclosed prior owner of her primary asset, the recorded threat made in public at the championship fairgrounds with Fletcher's account and 3 witness statements attached. The judge was a woman named Margaret Aldine, who had been on the bench in Laramie for 11 years and who listened to everything Whitfield said with the attention of someone for whom listening was a professional discipline. She asked 6 questions. All 6 were precise. None of them were the kind of questions asked by a person who has already decided and is looking for confirmation. They were the kind asked by a person who is genuinely working. Blackwood's attorney argued that the mortgage acquisition was legal, and the connection to the horse's prior ownership was irrelevant to the terms of the note. It was a clean argument, tightly made. Evelyn watched him make it and recognized that on a different day, with different facts, it might have worked. But Whitfield had one more piece. He presented the jar that Cody had found in the stable, the sample that Whitfield had sent to his contact in Cheyenne 3 weeks earlier, the written analysis that had come back 9 days ago, and that Whitfield had said nothing about nothing at all until this moment, because he was a man who understood that information is most useful when it is deployed at exactly the right instant. The analysis confirmed the presence of a plant compound known to cause temporary respiratory distress and inflammation of the throat in horses. Not lethal in the quantities present, but sufficient in the week before a major competition to compromise a horse's performance in an endurance event in ways that might not be visibly obvious at the start line. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Aldine looked at the document for a long time. Then she looked at Blackwood's attorney. "Does your client wish to respond to this?" she asked. Blackwood's attorney asked for a recess. They recessed for 20 minutes. When they returned, Blackwood's attorney made a statement that had the particular quality of words that have been hastily assembled to sound like a position while actually being a retreat. He said his client denied any knowledge of the incident. He said the compound could have entered the water supply through any number of natural means. He said, Judge Aldine held up one hand. The attorney stopped. "I've heard enough on that point," she said. "We'll address the criminal investigation through Sheriff Cole's office in Fremont County, which I understand is already open." She looked at her papers. "On the matter before me today, which is the validity of the mortgage acquisition and the question of conflict of interest." She ruled in Evelyn's favor, not partially, not conditionally. She ruled that the acquisition of the mortgage note by a party with an undisclosed prior ownership stake in the mortgagee's primary asset, combined with documented evidence of active efforts to acquire that asset through other means during the same period, constituted a material conflict of interest that vitiated the transfer. The mortgage reverted to the original banknote. The original 60-day extension made before Blackwood's acquisition was reinstated. She also ordered that Blackwood's name be placed in the court's record in connection with the open investigation into the stable incident, which was not a criminal finding, but was a public document, which meant that anyone who wanted to know what Judge Margaret Aldine of the Laramie bench thought was worth putting in the public record now had a clear answer. Whitfield shook Evelyn's hand on the courthouse steps. He was not a demonstrative man. The handshake was enough. The expression that went with it was enough. "The protest decision came in this morning," he said, as though he'd been waiting for the right moment to mention it. She stared at him. "This morning. Before the hearing. I didn't want it to affect your composure." He produced a letter from his satchel. The championship officials found that Patterson's failure to disclose his social relationship with Nathaniel Blackwood prior to judging constituted a violation of the competition charter's conflict of interest provisions. His scores in all phases have been invalidated. She took the letter. "Without Patterson's scores," Whitfield continued, "the aggregate is calculated from Mercer and Aldridge alone. Dusty's aggregate from those two judges is 8.85. Territory King's aggregate from those two judges is 8.2. Evelyn looked at the letter in her hands. "She won," she said. "She won," Whitfield confirmed. "By the rules of the championship as written, the official result will be corrected in the registry." He paused. "The trophy presentation is being rescheduled. They've asked whether you would like to bring the horse." She looked up at him. "Yes," she said, "I would like to bring the horse." She did not cry until she was in the carriage on the way back to Fremont County, and even then she did not cry for long. She was not built for prolonged weeping, and she had too many things to think through to give more than a few minutes to the specific, complicated grief and relief and anger and gratitude that were moving through her all at once. She let herself feel all of it in those few minutes. She let herself think about Thomas, and about the auction yard, and about the nights with the lantern outside the stable, and the mornings when she wasn't entirely sure she had made the right decision. She had made the right decision. She had known it then, and she knew it now, and in between, there had been a lot of days when knowing it hadn't made it easier, and she was allowed to feel all of those days at once for a few minutes on a carriage road in Wyoming, while the county she'd spent the last 14 months fighting in came back into view. Then she put it away. She had work to do. The partnership agreement with Crawford was signed 3 weeks later with Reeves's drafted terms largely intact and Whitfield's revisions to 3 clauses that he felt required tightening. The capital transferred within the week, and Evelyn walked to the bank on a Tuesday morning and settled her debt in full in a single payment in cash in front of the same teller named Harris, who had slid that piece of paper across the counter with Blackwood's name on it. Harris looked at the payment and then at Evelyn and said very quietly, "I'm glad, Mrs. Carter." "Thank you, Harris," she said. "So am I." She shook his hand and walked out. Cody was waiting on the boardwalk with the wagon. "All of it," he said. "Every dollar," she said. He permitted himself, for possibly the first time in their 18 months of working together, a full and uncomplicated smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The trophy presentation happened on a Saturday 1 month after the championship. They came from across the territory, the same crowd that had watched the trials, and more besides, because Fletcher's story had traveled in the way that stories travel when they are about something people needed to hear. There were breeders from Denver. There were people Evelyn had never met and would probably never meet again. There were women she recognized from town who had whispered about her and who now watched her from the crowd with expressions that occupied the complicated territory between admiration and something more personal. The look of people who are recognizing something in another person's story that they need for their own. Samuel stood beside her at the presentation, which was right, because he had earned his place there in the way that only people who show up to do the work earn places anywhere. Beckett made a brief speech that was largely about the horse, and which Evelyn appreciated because this was always about the horse. When the trophy was placed in Evelyn's hands, it was heavier than she expected and simpler looking than she had imagined, and she held it with both hands and looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Dusty, who was standing with Cody 15 feet away, watching the crowd with her ears forward and her dark eyes taking everything in with the composed attention of an animal that has decided the world is mostly interesting and occasionally surprising and not, on the whole, worth panic. She looked like herself. She looked like the horse she had always been, which was the horse that nobody saw until the one person who was paying attention walked through a crowd and put money on a table. Nathaniel Blackwood was not at the presentation. He was not at much of anything public for the months that followed. The criminal investigation into the stable incident concluded without a formal charge against him. Specifically, the men Cole had questioned recanted their inconsistencies without admitting what the inconsistencies had implied. But the investigation had been open, and the record of it was public, and the record of the Laramie ruling was public, and Fletcher's original article was public, and in a small territory where reputation is currency, Nathaniel Blackwood discovered what happens when a man's public account becomes overdrawn. He did not lose his land. He did not lose his fortune. Men like Blackwood rarely lose those things entirely. But he lost the thing that had always mattered more to him than either, which was the unquestioned assumption of his authority in every room he entered. That assumption requires the consent of the room, and the room had revised its position. Evelyn did not think about him much. She had a ranch to run, and a breeding program to develop, and a horse to keep sound, and a partnership to honor, and a debt-free life to build from the ground up, which was the same thing she had been doing since October of 1882, just with better resources and clearer terms. Dusty's first foal arrived the following spring, a filly dark-colored like her mother, with the same quality of regard in her eyes, that watchful, patient, assessing look that Evelyn had first seen over an auction fence and had never fully recovered from. Samuel was there. Crawford had sent a representative from Denver who arrived 3 days before the birth and spent the waiting time reviewing Holt's documentation with the reverence of someone handling something he had long believed lost. When the filly stood for the first time, shaky and determined in the specific way of new things that have no choice but to commit to the attempt, Samuel said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "There she is." And Evelyn understood exactly what he meant. The filly carried it. The conformation, the quality of movement, even in those first uncertain steps, the inheritance of everything that Dusty had been and survived and proven. It was there. It was undeniable. And it would go forward now, documented and confirmed, and publicly known into a future that stretched beyond this stable, and this ranch, and this county, and this particular fight. Evelyn named the filly First Dollar, because the first dollar was the one that mattered. The one you spend when everyone tells you it's a mistake. The one you spend when you see something nobody else is willing to see. The one that is in the end the truest measure of what a person believes. Over the years that followed, the Carter breeding program became one of the most respected in the territory, and then beyond the territory, as Crawford's network expanded the reach of what Evelyn had started. The Silver Creek lineage, believed lost for a decade, was now documented and traceable, and producing horses that justified every word Arthur Holt had ever written about what that bloodline represented. Breeders came from states she had never visited. Letters arrived from people she had never met. Fletcher wrote 3 more articles, each one tracking a new chapter of the story that had started with a $25 bid in a county auction yard, and each one found an audience that the previous one had prepared. Cody Marsh stayed. He was not a seasonal hire anymore, and hadn't been for a long time. He grew from a 19-year-old boy, learning to read a horse's mood, to a man who could assess a foal's potential at 2 days old, and be right more often than not. And Evelyn gave him the north section of the ranch to manage in his own right, in the year he turned 24. He ran it the way she had taught him to run things, with patience and attention, and the fundamental conviction that the work required your full self, or it was not worth doing. Samuel Dawson died in the winter of 1889, in his own bed, in his own time, having spent the last years of his life doing exactly what he had always done. He left Evelyn his complete records, 40 years of documentation, breeding histories, lineage charts, the collected knowledge of a man who had understood, before most people did, that the past matters and can be proven. She kept them in the strongbox beside her own documents, and went to them often, not just for information, but for the comfort of his handwriting, which was careful and precise, and looked on every page like someone who respected what he was putting down. She thought about him on the morning she worked Dusty's descendants, watching the quality of movement she had first seen in a dusty brown mare traveling 6 miles of road after an auction, and she thought he would have said exactly what this is. He would have found exactly the right words, and he would have spoken them without excess, and he would have been right. On the day Evelyn Carter turned 40, she sat on the fence of the main paddock in the early morning before the day's work began, watching 3 of Dusty's grandchildren move across the grass, and she held her coffee with both hands and let herself do what she rarely allowed herself to do, which was simply look at what she had built, without immediately turning to what still needed doing. Dusty was 20 years old, and still sound, still bright-eyed, still possessed of that quality that Evelyn had felt through a fence rail on a long afternoon walk home, that patience, that certainty, that willingness to wait out the storm. She was retired from work, and had been for 3 years, which she appeared to regard as her due. She stood in the paddock in the mornings and watched her grandchildren with the composed attention of a creature that has earned the right to observe. Evelyn watched her. She thought about the auction yard. She thought about $25. She thought about everyone who had laughed. Some of them had apologized over the years, in the various ways people apologize when circumstances make apology unavoidable. Some sincerely. Some because sincerity was now the more advantageous position, and she had received all of them with the same steady courtesy, because she had learned that carrying grievances was weight she needed for other things. But she also thought about the moment itself, the money on the table, the laughter, the walk through the gate with her spine straight, and Dusty behind her, and she understood that the moment had been complete in itself. Before any outcome, before any verification, or trophy, or partnership, or headline. She had seen something. She had acted on what she saw. Everything else had followed from that. She got down from the fence and walked across the paddock toward Dusty, who turned her head at the sound of her footsteps with that same ear-forward recognition she had shown since those first careful weeks. Evelyn reached her and put her hand on the mare's neck the way she had done 10,000 times. Dusty leaned into it, just as she always had. Just as she had decided to do on a walk home from an auction yard, when a woman with empty hands and $25 worth of faith had told her, "I've got you now. We're going to walk out of here together. And we're not going to let them see us hurry." They had walked out. They had not hurried. And the world that had laughed them through the gate was the same world that now spoke their names together. Evelyn Carter and Dusty, the widow, and the $25 horse, as proof of the one thing that cannot be auctioned off, cannot be foreclosed upon, cannot be scored by a compromised judge or buried by a frightened man's money. The thing that sees clearly when the room has decided not to. The thing that steps forward when stepping forward costs everything. The thing that was never not for a single day of its life worth nothing.